The rain is falling outside, and the room is warm again. Before we begin, what kind of stories would you love to hear more of? Leave me a comment. I love choosing tales that bring you comfort. And if you'd like to return tomorrow, just tap subscribe. Now, let's drift into tonight's story. There's a kind of rhythm that life settles into when you stop resisting it. It's not always comforting, not in the way a warm drink or familiar voice is, but it is consistent. It wraps around your days like the dull hum of a refrigerator, easy to forget until everything else goes silent. For me, that rhythm was the 7-6 train. Every morning, Platform 3. Second car from the front. The train arrived with the same mechanical sigh, the same hiss of opening doors, the same shuffle of sleepy bodies, and quiet, routine despair. I didn't hate it. Hate requires too much energy. I simply accepted it. My seat was by the window, third row. I never reserved it. I didn't need to. People are creatures of habit, and most had silently agreed where they belonged. But even more consistent than my own presence on that train was his. The man who always sat 2 rows ahead, left side window seat, always the same gray wool coat, shoulders slightly hunched. His hair was silver, not white combed carefully, though never freshly. He carried a book, thick and cloth-bound, the kind you don't see in bookstores anymore. But he never read it, not once. The first time I noticed him was weeks into my commute, maybe months. It's hard to tell when noticing becomes observing. I remember it was raining, one of those light, steady rains that makes everything feel like it's waiting for something. I had no umbrella, just the wet collar of my coat and the soft irritation of damp socks. I took my seat and looked up, and there he was, book in lap, hands folded gently over the cover, eyes closed, not asleep, just still. Like the train moved around him, but he remained separate, untouched. From that moment, I began to look for him each morning. I never meant to. It became reflex. Some mornings, he arrived after me. Others, he was already there, settled like part of the seat itself. We never spoke, not once, not even a nod. But I came to expect his presence the way I expected the train to brake slightly too hard at the third stop. People came and went. The train changed in small, forgettable ways. New posters, different conductors. But he stayed the same. Gray coat, book unread, eyes open. Sometimes looking out the window. Sometimes resting on nothing at all. And there was something about that consistence, about his complete detachment from everyone around him, that made him feel less like a passenger and more like part of the train's architecture. Something fixed, reliable. In a world that never seemed to pause, he was a held breath. And some part of my tired, quiet, unspoken was grateful for that. I used to wonder where he was going. Everyone on that train was headed somewhere, even if they didn't want to be. Some carried bags, coffee, voices on the phone. He carried none of those, just the book and silence. There was never a sign of destination, never a glance at the station signs, and somehow I never saw him get off. I'd blink and he'd be gone, as if the train released him somewhere I couldn't see. I began to build quiet stories about him in my head. not full one's just pieces. Maybe he was a professor, retired now, writing out old patterns. Maybe the book was from someone he'd lost, and opening it would mean facing something he wasn't ready for. Or maybe it was empty. Maybe it was just a cover with nothing inside, and he held it not to remember, but to forget. Whatever the truth was, I didn't need to know. I didn't want to know. There was peace in the not knowing, in the soft certainty of shared space, unspoken and intact. And on the days when my mind was loud and the world felt like it was pushing in from every side, I looked 2 rows ahead, and he'd be there, still present. And something in me would whisper, "You don't have to figure everything out today." And I'd believe it, if only for the length of a train ride. There's a particular kind of silence that follows something familiar being out of place. Not loud, not dramatic, just wrong in a quiet, stubborn way. That morning, the train was late by 4 minutes, a rare thing. I remember noticing the delay because I looked at my watch, not because I cared. It was raining again, but harder this time, a steady percussion against the glass roof of the platform. I boarded as usual, coat damp around the edges, coffee lukewarm in my hand. Same second car. Same seat by the window. 3rd row. And just like always, my eyes flicked forward before I even settled. 2 rows ahead. Left side, window seat, empty. It was such a small thing, really. An empty seat. People miss trains all the time. It's nothing. But it felt like the air around it was wrong, as if the space hadn't adjusted to the absence yet. The seat wasn't just unoccupied, it was waiting, and not for just anyone. I sat down and told myself it was fine. He'd be on tomorrow. People have appointments, late mornings, better things to do. But still, I kept looking up every few minutes, expecting him to appear from the aisle, perhaps removing his coat with quiet precision, book under his arm. He never came. The train moved on, indifferent. People scrolled, yawned, sipped from paper cups. The rain blurred the window, washing color from the landscape. But that one seat remained a weight in my periphery. It was strange, I thought, how someone who'd never spoken a single word to me could leave such an absence. I tried to read, but my eyes didn't settle. I kept replaying old details I didn't know I'd memorized. How he'd fold his hands over the book, never tightly, never carelessly. How his shoes were always polished, as if he still respected the idea of arriving somewhere. The way he leaned ever so slightly toward the window, but never pressed against it. All those things I'd never meant to notice became the shape of his missing. By the time we reached the final station, my thoughts were louder than the city outside. I stayed in my seat longer than usual, letting the crowd thin. I half expected to see him on the platform, stepping off another car, but no. Just umbrellas, hurried steps, and the rising noise of morning. I walked to the office, slower that day, as though part of me hadn't fully disembarked. The next morning, I was early, earlier than I'd ever been. Not to chase him, not to prove anything. I just needed to know. The train arrived on time. Same sigh, same hiss, same shuffle. I boarded, second car, 3rd row. He wasn't there. I didn't sit. I walked the aisle slowly, trying not to look like I was looking. Each row passed like a quiet question, but none of the answers fit. His seat was empty again, and something in me felt unsettled, like a page left dog-eared too long. I sat in my place and stared out the window, not watching anything, just waiting to stop waiting. And for the first time, I thought to myself, did he stop writing? Or did I just stop seeing him? The idea unnerved me more than I expected. The train moved forward, as it always did. Life didn't pause for my curiosity, but that morning, the silence felt heavier. The kind that says, some things leave quietly. That doesn't mean they didn't matter, and I carried that weight with Menno as sadness, but as presence, as a reminder that even quiet things leave echoes. I told myself it was about the man on the train, his absence, his silence that used to be there each morning, anchoring something in me I hadn't realized was drifting. But if I'm on a stand, I'm learning, slowly, how to be his empty seat didn't create the emptiness I felt. It simply pointed to a space that had already been there, long before the first 7-6 departure. A quiet place I'd stopped visiting. I suppose we all have them internal waiting rooms filled with things we meant to return to. Unfinished conversations, untended grief, words rehearsed but never spoken. Mine had been locked for years. And somehow, watching that man day after day, silent and whole in his solitude, had reminded me that stillness wasn't the same as being stuck. That being alone didn't have to feel like being lost. There was someone in my life once who used to sit with me in silence. She never filled the quiet with noise, and that's what made her presence so loud. I never told her that. We'd sit on park benches sometimes, or on her balcony when the city was too much. She liked to observe people passing by, not judge, just notice. She'd say things like, "He walks like he's apologizing to the pavement," or "She's carrying a bag full of secrets. Look at her hands." She taught me how to listen without preparing a reply, to witness without the need to fix. I haven't seen her in years, not because something terrible happened. Sometimes people just drift apart the way fog leaves the morning without sound, without ceremony. And yet, some mornings, when I'd look 2 rows ahead at the man with the unread book, I'd remember her. I think it was the way he existed without explanation, the way he claimed his place in the world without asking for permission. She was like that too. Maybe that's why his absence felt like more than it should, because it touched something older in me, something I hadn't named in a long time. I found myself walking different streets after work, retracing old paths. I passed the cafe where she once told me, quietly, that not everything broken needs to be fixed. Some things just need to be held. I sat on the bench where I once waited too long to say I'm sorry, and by the time I found the words, she was already smiling like she'd heard them anyway. These memories didn't hurt, not like they used to. They just echoed, softly, like the footsteps of someone walking just behind you, not trying to catch up, just letting you know they're still there. I never called her, didn't write. I wasn't sure what I'd say. I saw someone on a train who reminded me of how whole you once made silence feel. No, some things belong to memory because that's where they're safest. But I did start writing again, just a little, pages I didn't plan to share, thoughts that didn't need to go anywhere, only out of me. One morning, as the train slid out of the station, I looked at the empty seat ahead and didn't wait for him. I simply acknowledged it. Like a scar you no longer run your fingers across, but still respect. And in that quiet, I heard a voice in me that didn't sound like her, or him, or even quite like me, but it said, "You miss people differently when you learn to sit with the silence they left." And I did, and I do. He was there again, just like that, as if he had never left, as if the space hadn't stretched in his absence, as if it hadn't swallowed up 2 long mornings and left me sitting in its echo. He was in the same seat. Of course, second row from the front, left side, window book resting on his lap like it always had, gray coat buttoned all the way up. The moment I saw him, something in me stilled, like a note resolving at the end of a song I didn't realize had been playing out of tune. I froze at the aisle for just a second longer than I should have, not because I didn't expect to see him, but because I did, and still it surprised me. I sat down slowly, almost reverently, like the seat itself had become a kind of chapel. Everything else around me was normal. The low hum of conversation, the shuffle of coats, the occasional squeak of rubber soles on damp metal, but I couldn't stop glancing forward. Something was different. Not about him, not obviously, but about how I saw him. Where once he'd been a silent fixture, a comfort of repetition, now he felt real, human, not mystery, but meaning. He hadn't changed, but I had. For the first few minutes, I watched with the care of someone afraid to disturb a sleeping animal. He didn't move much, just stared out the window like before. But this time, his shoulders seemed heavier, not slumped, just settled. His hands, once folded so neatly, now rested open, almost slack, palms toward the ceiling like he'd forgotten how to hold things. And the book still closed, still unread sat, at a slight angle, as if he'd picked it up that morning and held it a beat too long before deciding to bring it anyway. It made me wonder, what kept him away? Not logistically, not physically, but what weight had he carried that needed 2 days to set down? I didn't ask, of course. I couldn't. We still hadn't exchanged a single word, but the silence between us had changed. It wasn't blank space anymore. It was shared, like a coat hung between 2 chairs, neither one quite willing to take it off the hook. I looked down at my hands. Empty, always empty. I thought about bringing something, maybe a book of my own. Not to match him, but to make the silence feel more intentional. I didn't. The ride passed quickly that day. Or maybe it passed the same, and I just moved through it more slowly. Time does that when you're paying attention. I kept wondering if he'd glance back, just once. If our eyes might meet in that soft, accidental way, strangers sometimes connect just enough to say, "I see you. I know you're here too." But he didn't look, and I didn't press the wish any further. Some people don't return for you to notice. Some return only to be left alone again. But still, something inside me shifted. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was steadier than before, like standing in shallow water and feeling the current move around your ankles instead of through your chest. As we neared the final stop, the man adjusted his coat and gently placed the book inside a canvas bag I'd never seen before. Just before he rose, he looked toward the window, not out of it, just toward I-10 for a second. I thought he might speak. He didn't. He simply stood, stepped into the aisle, and walked past me without pause. But as he passed, the faint scent of something old and familiar drifted with him. Not cologne, not soap, something harder to name. Maybe pages, maybe pine, maybe the memory of a hallway where you once waited to hear a voice that never came. I didn't turn to watch him go. I just looked down at my hands again and let the quiet sit next to me like an old friend. And for the first time in weeks, I heard a voice in myself that sounded whole, not loud, not certain, just whole. Sometimes, people leave to remind you how deeply they were there. And now that he was back, I didn't need answers. I just needed to keep showing up. It started with a pen. Not a fancy one, just a simple black ink pen with a soft rubber grip I liked. I put it in my coat pocket that morning without thinking. I didn't plan to write anything. In fact, I hadn't written by hand in months. But there it was. Between my fingers while I waited for the train, while I leaned against the metal rail of the platform and let the cold settle into my sleeves. The man had returned again that week. Every day, on time, in his seat, still silent, still holding the book. He never opened, and me, I'd begun to feel like a different kind of passenger. Not just someone going from one place to another, but someone occupying the journey, fully, deliberately. As though my own presence had changed weight, the pen became habit. I didn't write in a notebook, not yet, but I started scribbling things on scraps, the corner of a receipt, the back of a folded train schedule, even napkins from the cafe near my stop. Just a few words. Sentences I didn't understand yet. Thoughts that weren't polished but real. One of the first things I wrote without knowing why was, "He makes silence feel like a language I forgot I knew." Some days I kept those scraps. Other days I threw them away. Not because they didn't matter, but because they'd done their job. Made room inside me. It's strange how something as small as a pen in your pocket can shift your relationship with the world. I found myself noticing again, not just the man 2 rows ahead, but everything. The way steam gathered at the edges of the window before sunrise. How some passengers, always boarded with their earbuds in but never played anything. How the train shook just slightly more as it crossed the river bridge, as if even metal felt uncertain in its crossing. And then one morning, I brought a different item. A bookmark. Worn leather corner bent something I'd kept in a drawer for years without really using it. It had belonged to my grandfather, a man who believed in finishing books even if he hated them. I brought it not because I needed it, but because I wanted to hold something that once meant completion. I slipped it between the pages of a book I didn't plan to read. I kept it in my lap, closed, just like the man did. It wasn't imitation, it was connection. Not with him, with myself. I looked at him that morning with less curiosity and more care. Not pity, not fascination. Just a quiet recognition that perhaps we were both doing the same thing in different ways. Showing up, holding something, carrying silence gently instead of fleeing from it. At one point, the train stopped longer than usual between stations. People glanced up, checking watches, sighing with polite annoyance. But he didn't move. He just sat, steady as always. And I found myself wishing not to know his story, but to tell him thank you. Not aloud, just somehow, for being there, for staying, for giving shape to silence in a world that constantly demands noise. I didn't say anything. Of course I didn't. I stayed in my seat and let the moment pass like all the others. But as the train resumed, as the rhythm returned, I placed my fingers on the closed cover of my book and whispered into my own mind, "You're allowed to carry something, even if you're not ready to share it." And that was enough. It happened so quickly, and yet it settled in me like something years in the making. The kind of moment that doesn't make a sound, but changes the air around you. I remember that morning vividly, not because it was different, but because I finally felt completely present in it. The sky was low and clouded, a pale gray that made the world seem quieter, closer. I'd brought my book again, the one I still hadn't opened, the bookmark tucked neatly inside. My pen was in my pocket, as always, resting against the paper sleeve of a folded receipt. I didn't write anything yet. I didn't need to. He was already there when I boarded. Second row, left side, book closed, same coat. But as I walked past his seat toward mine, I hesitated just for a breath. It wasn't enough to be obvious. Barely a pause, but it was enough that he noticed. I didn't see it right away. I kept walking, slid into my seat, pulled my coat tighter, and then, just before I looked away, I saw it. He shifted. Not much, not even enough for most people to register, but he turned his head slightly, carefully, and looked in my direction. Not at me, not straight on, but enough. Enough for our eyes to nearly meet. Enough to know it wasn't an accident. He held the glance for less than 2 seconds, then turned back toward the window, folded his hands over his book, and resumed his stillness. But for me, the world moved differently after that. That single glance carried 1,000 unspoken things. I see you. I know you're here. I know you've been here. It wasn't invitation or apology or expectation. It was recognition, and it landed in me with quiet force, like a door opening somewhere deep inside that had been closed for so long, even the hinges had forgotten the sound of movement. The rest of the ride passed in soft pieces. I didn't write, but I held my pen. I didn't open my book, but I placed it carefully on my lap. I let the train's rhythm become part of me. The sound of the tracks, the gentle sway, the hum of quiet lives in motion. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't wonder where he was going. I didn't create stories or chase explanations. I simply sat with the knowledge that we both were, here, now. As we neared the final station, I looked ahead again, expecting him to prepare to leave like usual. But instead, he stayed seated. The train slowed. Passengers began to rise. But he remained still, and so did I. The doors opened. People filed out. Neither of us moved. And then, just as the last footstep passed our row, he reached into his coat pocket, not hurried, not unsure, placed something onto the seat beside him, a folded piece of paper, plain, no markings, no envelope. Then, without looking back, he rose and stepped into the aisle. My heart slowed. Or maybe it paused. He walked past me with the same calm rhythm he always had, but something in his movement felt softer, not tired finished, like a chapter turned quietly, with no fanfare, just readiness. I didn't follow the note right away. I waited. Let the doors close. Let the train begin to empty its breath. And only then, only once the silence felt clean again, did I stand and walk the 2 rows forward. The paper was folded once, crisply. I picked it up with both hands, not trembling, just steady. On the inside, in neat, almost calligraphic handwriting, was a single sentence. "You've been here too, haven't you?" I sat down slowly in his seat, the seat that had always been his, and felt the words settle into me like a voice I'd been missing. And I didn't answer out loud. I didn't need to. But inside, quietly, I replied, "Yes, I have." I took my time that morning. Not just in walking, but in existing. There was no rush, no panic in the brushing of teeth, no urgent check of my watch, no restless tapping of fingers at red lights. Everything was slow, and I let it be. The air was cold, but not cruel. I passed a group of children laughing on a corner and didn't turn my head away like I used to. I stood in line for my coffee and said thank you with intention. It wasn't a good morning in the way people throw the phrase around. It was a real one. And real was more than enough. In my coat pocket was a piece of heavy cream paper folded once. No logo, no lines, just space. On it, in ink the color of dried leaves, I had written a single sentence the night before. Not rehearsed, not brainstormed, just written. The way you breathe out when you finally stop bracing for something that never came. You are more than what you've survived. I didn't know who it was for. Maybe no one. Maybe someone I'd never see. Maybe someone who would sit where I had sat, look out the same window, and carry the same invisible weight. I didn't write it to be profound. I wrote it because it was the one sentence I needed years ago, and no one had left it for me. So I wrote it now, for the version of me who never got it, for whoever still might. He wasn't there that day. The man, the one with the coat, the book, the silence that once wrapped around the cabin like a second wall. His seat was empty again. But it didn't feel empty the same way it had before. It felt open, held, like a garden that had been cared for long enough that now it could welcome new hands. I waited a while before moving, just let the moment settle. The train's rhythm felt slower, though I knew it wasn't. That's what presence does, it stretches time gently, like soft fabric across the lap. When I stood, I didn't hesitate. I walked to his seat. I didn't look around to see if anyone was watching. I didn't need to feel hidden to feel safe anymore. I bent down and slid the folded note between the seat and the window rail, where it wouldn't blow away but could still be found. I didn't press it down. I let it rest. And then I sat there, just for a moment, in the space he'd once occupied. My knees fit differently than his. My coat brushed the armrest where his always hovered above. But the view was the same. Rows of houses sliding past, trees flickering like old film. The same path, now seen through new eyes. When I returned to my seat, I didn't feel lighter or heavier. I just felt right, like something had been completed, even though nothing was finished. The train continued. People boarded. People left. None of them saw what I had left behind. Or maybe someone did. Maybe someone would find it next week or next year or never. But that's the thing about these kinds of offerings. You don't leave them to be found. You leave them because you were here. And as the train pulled into the final station, I whispered one last time to him, not to the seat, not to the memory, just to the quiet that now lived inside me. I'm ready now. Thank you. There are days that end without punctuation. They don't close like chapters, don't slam shut like doors. They just drift quietly into the next. That's how it felt that final morning. Not final because something ended, but final because something had settled. The train was on time. The coffee was lukewarm. My coat had the usual crease from where it caught on the door. But inside me, something had changed. Or maybe something had stopped changing. That morning, I didn't look for him. I sat in my seat and didn't lean forward to peer ahead. I didn't scan the rows or count seconds until departure. I didn't reach for the note I'd left the day before. Whether it had been taken or not no longer mattered. It had done its part, and now so had I. I looked out the window and let the world slide past like it always had. Same rooftops, same half-sleeping trees, same graffiti I could now trace by memory. But this time, the view felt different. Not because it had changed, but because I had stopped resisting it, stopped asking it to explain itself. The train moved, and I moved with it, without urgency, without analysis, just movement, presence. At one of the smaller stations, a woman boarded, mid-30s maybe. She wore a navy coat and carried a large tote with nothing on the outside except a single sewn-on patch that read, "Almost Home." She looked tired not in the way people look after a long day, but in the way people look after carrying something invisible for too long. She walked slowly through the car, scanning the rows, and then she sat in his seat. The second row, left side, window. She didn't look around, didn't notice me. She just sat, placed the bag gently beside her, and looked out the window with that same kind of stillness I once watched in a man who never spoke. I didn't stare. I didn't watch her the whole time. But I felt something shift, as if the train exhaled with relief, as if the space had always been meant to be passed on. I thought about the note, whether it was still there, whether she might find it, whether she even needed to. Maybe she brought her own. Maybe she had a sentence folded into her sleeve, just waiting for the right stop to open it. The train moved forward, and so did I. When we reached the final station, I stood, gathered my things slowly. She didn't move, just sat, staring ahead, soft in her edges. I passed her row, and for just a moment, let my fingers brush the edge of the seat in front of hers. Not as a goodbye, not as a memory, just acknowledgement. Outside, the city greeted me like it always had. Busy, indifferent, familiar. But I walked differently. Now not straighter, not faster, just with more weight in the right places. And I realized I no longer needed to imagine who he was or where he'd gone. The truth was simple and enough. He was someone who sat quietly in the same place every morning. And that, somehow, helped me come back to myself, I reached into my coat pocket, not for the pen or the paper, but just to feel the space where they used to be. It was empty now, but not hollow. And as I crossed the street, I whispered quietly, kindly, like a ritual. If you're reading this now, you're exactly where you need to be. And I meant it.